I'm going to start the recording officially. And just for the record, all of you are all muted pretty much, both as to microphone and camera. So if you do have something you want to share or ask, make sure that you unmute first so I can hear you, because once I start officially sharing my screen, I will not be able to hear you. I'm not doing these live on Facebook either. Too much work. Too much work to go live on Facebook these days. Let's get out of here and there and go over here. Let's go to the QuickBooks test drive. By the way, there's a QuickBooks Online Advanced test drive now that you can access. All right, and so just for a little kind of background and context on what we're talking about here, we're talking about automating the reports, and we're talking about bulletproof bookkeeping. And, so the idea here is we start off, and as I've done in the course, we start off with the bank feeds, right? Might as well bring up the course outline so I can speak to this right in front of you. Let's go to courses. Airtable is truly my favorite thing in the world these days. I just started working on a project for a client in Airtable. That's been really fun to do, and I've gotten paid really well for it. But that's another story for another day. Join our 97 and up club, and we can talk about it there. So this is the outline, and I'll just kind of zip this up real quick just to kind of speak to this. So, to get bulletproof books, what does bulletproof mean? It means that I can verify every number, right? That's the difference I described. Compliance is like, well, it's good enough. It's probably reasonably accurate. But bulletproof means I can really prove every number. And it starts with the banking and the bank feeds, right? That's where we start bringing in the transactions and coding them and kind of putting them in their homes where they're going to live in our set of books. And then I go through and I drill down deep into each of the lists because I want to make sure that everybody's really familiar with every nook and cranny, everything you can do, where you can put attachments, where you can put notes, within a customer, vendor, and so on. And so I dove deep into that. And then there's the rest of the sections that really get into, different areas that you need to manage when you're managing a set of books, and not just how to do it, but how to do it in a way that creates the right sort of trail, right? We call it an audit trail, but that audit word scares some people. But ultimately, it's about keeping the books really clean. And it's not just about having copies of receipts to prove things. It's also how you record things, and recording things in a way that speaks to when we're running reports. At the end of the day, all the stuff we input into the system is for the purpose of being able to get good information out of the system. And that, of course, is where the reports come in. So I'm kind of jumping right to the end. And, we have this whole section on management reports here in the, in the course. And, so this is really what I want to speak to actually today a little bit. And there's a deep dive lesson in here somewhere on really essentially what I'm going to show you today, probably just not in as much detail. But the idea is part of the process of getting and then keeping the books bulletproof is that you have to have some kind of a review system, right? I need to review my transactions, and really I need to review my reports. The one thing I learned early on working with a lot of different business owners is even when the business owners really know nothing of the accounting, what I've learned to trust is that instinctively they do know when something doesn't look right when they're looking at a financial report, because most business owners are at least savvy to what's going on operationally in their business. So if sales look way out of whack, they know it. If the bank account balances look out of whack, they definitely recognize that. How many times I've run a balance sheet, I can't tell you, where I've shown it to the owner and they've said, there's no way I don't have that much money in the bank, and this is usually in the beginning when I'm just starting to get the work done. And then I know, okay, well, I know where we need to start then, right? Because we, as I've mentioned many times over the years, we use the balance sheet as our checklist to make sure that everything looks right. So jumping back over to QuickBooks, at this point, that's the first report always we're going to look at. You always want to start with the balance sheet. And what we want to do, because yes, I can jump into QuickBooks and I can run the reports. The problem is most people don't, and most people won't without some kind of a reminder. So one of the features I've loved for a long time about QuickBooks Online that I still don't believe is available in any other cloud accounting product, and I don't know why, is the ability to automate a group of reports and have them get sent out on a schedule. Now, as the accountant, this is very valuable because I love having a set of reports that goes out to my business owner clients on both a weekly basis and then on a monthly basis. And we define different sets of reports for each. Some of them do overlap into both groups. So that's definitely a starting point. And then, so again, a lot of business owners will tell me, well, why do I need that? I can just log in and run the reports myself. And I say, yes, great, but let's see you do it. And so what happens is the automated sending of the reports, I don't care if somebody never actually looks at the attachments that come in the email, as long as getting that email is the trigger for going in and then actually running the live reports online, right? And some clients don't want to or can't be bothered to log into QuickBooks, and they're happy to look at the attachments. And I personally prefer to send them, because you do have the choice, and I'm going to walk through all of this. I prefer to send them in Excel format, because nothing would be better in my world than for a client to download that report, go through it, mark it up with comments in one of the columns in Excel, and send it back to me. Better still, which is the way I normally really like to do this, is before it even comes to that, we get together in the Zoom, just like all of us are right now, and then one of us can share screens and we can look at the live reports. And this way, it's not just going back and forth in emails with comments forever, but rather the business owner client can comment to me and say, okay, the banking doesn't look right. Well, at this point, if I've cleaned up the books, I can show them, well, it's reconciled. The only thing at that point that might be throwing the balance off is, let's say we have a lot of uncleared checks or transactions in general that are sitting there in the bank account and need to be cleaned up. And there's a report that I walk through in this very section. Actually, it's in two places in the course. One right after the banking, because it's one of the things I do after we update the bank feeds and reconcile the bank statements, is I always run an uncleared transaction report. And I look for anything that's uncleared that's really old that probably needs to be addressed, based on whatever the situation is. And then we cover it again here in the management reports, because again, it's an important thing to review. If you're keeping the books up the way this course teaches you, then you're going to have accurately reconciled accounts. But like I said, there still could be a difference between what's in QuickBooks and what's on the bank statement, usually based on things that are in QuickBooks that haven't cleared yet, which, by the way, usually means QuickBooks is going to show a lower balance than the bank does. If it ever goes the other way, you need to jump in there and figure out what's going on. That you can't wait on, because it should really never go that way. It's very unlikely in this day and age that you have large deposits in transit, which is the only thing that would cause that, deposits that you've recorded in QuickBooks that haven't hit the bank yet. Usually deposits this day and age, because of the way we do things with bank feeds, they're usually already in the bank by the time we record them in QuickBooks. Not saying there won't be exceptions, but the point being, whenever you go into the banking area here and you're looking at the downloads, if the QuickBooks balance is somehow higher than the checking, like it is in this case, and this is the dummy company, then this would be something I'd want to address, but not before adding in the 25 transactions, because that will likely include whatever is currently making up the difference between the overdraft balance that the bank shows versus what's in QuickBooks, right? So, and I'm bringing all this up to underscore the importance of understanding what to expect to see when you're looking here. Because if you come into this, especially reviewing reports, with an expectation about certain things, then when things don't look right, it will jump out that much more clearly, right? So it's important to kind of know what to look for and to start to learn to recognize what, like what isn't there, right? Like let's say there is no accounts receivable here, and I know that this client definitely invoices customers, so it's not just that looking at what's here in the report, but it's looking at what's not here, right? So there's a series of reports I like to run and send to the client on a weekly basis, and then a series that go out on a monthly basis. And you'll find that if we go to the reports area under custom reports, right, initially it's going to be blank, just like this is. And the weird thing is there's no way from this screen to just create one. You have to kind of start with a standard, right? So the first thing I might say I'd like to look at is the balance sheet. And I want it this year to date. And I want to group it by month. And when I run that, what I like about this report is it enables me to analyze trends, right? The only other tweak I might put on this is, instead of this year to date, and this is another thing I love about QBO, is I have this choice, this year to last month. I may not necessarily want to look at the current month, especially if this is in the weekly reports, because it's not done yet, right? And that's up to you. Some of you may want to, for that same reason, you may want to actually see what's this month to date. But I'm going to show you some other reports that I like to run that address, the issue of looking at what's actually going on this month to date, right? So again, this is all strictly, there's no right or wrong. It's strictly based on what do you want to see, right? And as the accountant, usually I'm having this conversation with my client and asking the client, what do you want to see? What's going to be very useful to you to look at every week, right? And then what I also usually try and do, and this is highly recommended, is to establish a set time with them. So especially if I'm going to review the reports with them, and that just depends on kind of what level they're at with me. The lower paying clients, obviously I don't do a weekly call with, but the higher paying clients, I'll do the weekly call and we'll schedule it. So I know that at a certain time and day every week, we're reviewing these reports, right? And so that's important. If it's a client who's not going to be doing it with me weekly, then I try and encourage them to schedule a weekly time that this is when I know they're going to review the reports. Also helps me because then I can be sort of aware and make sure I'm available to answer questions. If I know that this client is reviewing the books every Friday, then I know that I can expect to maybe hear from them on Friday or the following Monday or over the weekend or whatever, right? And so I can be on the lookout and just be prepared to respond to them promptly when they've got questions about things. So this will be the first report I'll include. I did say let's just do this year to date so we could see this month so far, right? And because I can see, hey, we finished last month off at 2,100. Now we're down to only 1,200, and it's the end of the month almost. We're a week away. We may be in trouble. Let's make sure when's the next payroll coming up. I can start asking cash flow related questions just looking at the balance. First thing, of course, to check is in the banking area to make sure we're completely up to date there before I start analyzing this, right? Because analyzing something that's incomplete is sort of pointless. All right, so what I want to do now is I'm going to save this and I'm going to create a group for it that's going to go out weekly to the client. So we're going to start with, first of all, customize it. What I'll do is I'll put balance sheet - weekly. And notice I just clicked in there and I can edit the title, right? That's something I think sort of newer that they've added. I think it's been that way for a few months, maybe most of this year, but it wasn't always like that. And the trick to doing, the reason I like to do it here before saving anything is whatever's in this report title is what it's going to pull to name the report when I'm memorizing it, right? So when I hit save customization, it grabs that title. And now what we're going to do is there's no groups created yet. So I'm going to say add a new group, and I'm going to call this weekly reports, right? If it's a bigger company, with my client, then I might do weekly management reports because there may be other report groups that I want to create, for people other than management. So we'll call that weekly management reports. I'll click add, and then that way I'm assigning it to the group. The share with is for the accountants like me who I could create this just for me and the clients won't see it. So I choose share with all, and that way I know it'll show up in everyone's custom reports. Important sort of caveat to that is that it'll show up in everybody's custom reports, but it won't show up in the group. The group is, in other words, individual to the user, right? Also note this dialog I got, it says I can't share this report because there's no other active user in this account. So in other words, you have to have other users to share something with, okay? So in this case, I'll just have to kind of pull this out or say share with none, save it. And now if I go to reports and custom reports, you'll see that I've got my weekly balance sheet in there, right? And if we're doing this with the balance sheet, then we probably also want to do something similar with the profit and loss. So let's go back to the standard reports. Then I'm going to create the profit and loss right off of that. Also this year to date, probably a good idea, whatever date convention you go with. Like if you did this year to last month, once you've chosen that, be consistent and set up all the kind of related reports in the same way, right? So this year to date on the P&L, also group by month because I want to be able to analyze trends, right? I want to see how sales have done month over month. On this one, I like to jump down to the bottom and see where we've trended substantially down. Looking at this one, May, it looks like was the first month we started the business. So I expect a loss in the first month, right? Then we immediately flip that around and turn a profit. And over here, we have a little bit less of a profit. Then we jump up. And so what I'll do if I'm looking at this with a client is start asking them questions. First of all, does this make sense? Does it line up? What happened? Did we, and it looks like, you can kind of tell the story of what happened, right? We opened up the business in May, we started ramping up, we finally started getting some revenues in June, right? And then it looks like in September, things really kicked in. but then I'd be asking what's going on, why isn't October here yet? Maybe we haven't caught up with the bookkeeping, or maybe business just died all of a sudden, right? The bottom line is I want an answer to that question, and this is the kind of stuff I start to analyze when I'm reviewing this stuff with the client. So now that we've established the group that this report is going into, I can just hit Save Customization. Actually, let me go back and edit the title. So I'll put Profit and Loss Weekly, and then save this in the same group. Now the group is there because I've created it. Okay, so I've got that report. Now another report I definitely want to send to the clients weekly. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to actually run a standard balance sheet. And what I'm going to do here, I do for every credit card account and every bank account is, and I'll just do one for today, just so you can see, once you see how to do it with one, you'll know how to do it with them all. So I click into that particular credit card or checking account. And what I do on the date range is I want to go near the bottom of the choices here, and I want since 30 days ago. Okay, and I'm going to run that. And so, and by having this report go out weekly, it gives me and the client a chance to review every transaction that's in here 4 times in a cycle before it cycles off the report. And the idea is I want the client to see every transaction that's going in and out of every bank account and every credit card account, because that's where we're most likely going to catch problems, you know, especially if there's any kind of fraud. If somebody's writing checks to fictitious payees or anything like that, the client's more likely to recognize that than I am, because they're the ones who are in the day-to-day operations of their business. So if they see something that looks sketchy in here, they're going to be in a much better place to recognize that than I would, right? So I practically insist that my clients look at this report for every bank account and every credit card account every single week, even if it's just a quick glance. I have one client that I review this report with weekly. He's a bigger client. And he glances at the names and he glances at the split accounts. And sometimes he'll give me, he'll ask me questions or give me suggestions about how we might reclassify something. He doesn't love the account I chose to book something to. The example I always bring up, because it's kind of a common one, is different client than the one I was referring to. Years ago when I started with him and I first put his books together, you know, I took all of his, you know, sign printing costs and I booked it to a printing expense account. And he said, no, I want that in advertising. I said, no problem. And I just reclassified it all to advertising, because for him, that printing is advertising. So a lot of times it's not a question of right or wrong. It's more a question of how do I want to be able to read this in my financial statements, and then reclassifying things there. And so I have a learning experience with my clients where we start to, especially when I'm first starting, and I look closely at these reports with the client, a big point of that is not just looking for things that are wrong, but just looking for things from the perspective of coding and classification, right? Because the way I record things here obviously drives where it's going to show up on my profit and loss or my balance sheet. And I want to build this picture in a way that's going to make it easy for me and the client to read and understand what's going on with their company financially. Because the numbers, as you saw an example of a few minutes ago, that when I was talking about it, the numbers tell us a story. And we want to make sure they're telling us the right story, which is the whole point of having bulletproof books, is that nothing's missing, nothing's miscoded, nothing's miscategorized by the time we're done reviewing everything. And that's how we know that what we're looking at is reliable, and that we can make decisions. And that way, when something doesn't look right, it's sort of easy to find and address the issue and correct it when the time comes.
Seth, does this have the option to expand? So
I can barely hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
That's a little better.
Sorry, I'm on, I don't know what, you can't hear me?
Okay, that's better, yeah. It's darker, but it's better.
Yeah, I was moving my phone. I'm in a different office. Okay, so I see you have some split transactions there. Is there an option to expand so that the owner can see what that is?
No, QuickBooks Desktop had that option. That option's not included here.
So they wouldn't be able to see the detail on that?
No, but like I said, the idea, at least for me, is to have the client review this. Even if they're getting emailed, I really ultimately want them in here with me in Zoom looking at this, so that if there is a question, then we can just, from here, we can click in and look at the details on something that's split, right? Like here's a deposit. But I get what you're saying. It would be nice to have that detail right there in the report. So like here you could see there's a deposit with 2 customer payments that make up that deposit total.
Yeah, Desktop does have that feature.
Yeah, Desktop has a feature where you could say include split detail. But as you look in here in the customization settings, you can change the columns around. You can change how the report is filtered. And you can alter the header or footer.
Okay.
there's no like include split detail option here,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
that's too bad. Since I've interrupted you, I'm going to go ahead and ask you if you could please clarify on the saving the customization and putting it in a group, and you save it to all users. They won't see it in the group, but they'll be able to see it.
Correct. They have to create their own groups if they want to have it in groups, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, the groups is, and you'll see why, because I'm gonna, when I'm done saving a few reports, I'm gonna show you how to schedule the automation so that it sends out automatically on that schedule. And so that I wouldn't want that to be a global thing, because I wouldn't want to have to push that on other users, right? That's something I'm setting up, and then I'm going to have it sent to the client by putting their email address in, right?
Okay.
So when you think about the logic of that, it kind of makes sense that it wouldn't be, grouped in the same way, because the group is what drives the scheduling, as you're going to see.
Okay.
So on this, we'll say save customization. And then I see it says transaction report. That's not very useful. This one was based on the checking account. So I'm going to rename this and call it checking. Normally, I have my bank accounts named for whatever the last 4 digits of the account number is. So I would include that. And then we can call it 30-day rolling detail, something like that. And then I save that customization in my weekly management reports. So, and again, I do this for every bank account and every credit card account. Even if it's a savings account that has 2 transactions a month, I don't care, because the minute I ignore something like that for that reason, that's when something sketchy is going to show up in that account and I'm going to miss it, right? That's just Murphy's Law, right? So I include everything always. And like one of my clients questions me on it a lot, like, why do we need to look at this account every week? And I say, because you'll thank me on the one day that something fraudulent shows up in that account, and you catch it within a week of when it posts, because of this process and because I'm so insistent and adamant that it be done this way, right? So I tell the clients that I work with, I've thought this all through because I've had all the bad experiences that I've needed to have in order to help me formulate these processes, right? In other words, there's a method to my madness. Okay, so we've got that report. Let me see what else I've got in the course here. The obvious ones, of course, we did the balance sheet and the P&L. The statement of cash flows, I won't necessarily include for a client until I know I've reviewed it with them and I've made sure that they at least can make a beginning at understanding how to read it. Because if you're not an accountant, you don't have a background in this, the statement of cash flows can be very confusing. And invariably, when I've sent it to a client without reviewing it first to make sure they understand what it's saying, I get angry emails and questions telling me that I screwed up their books and everything looks wrong because that's not what their accounts receivable should be. And why is their accounts receivable negative? And I have to start explaining at that point to them in a very different state of mind why accounts receivable being negative on a statement cash flows doesn't mean that their accounts receivable balance is actually negative. So anyway, so I hesitate to include the statement of cash flows until I know that, and that's a good general rule to go by. If you're sending something to a reader of those financial reports, you should probably make sure they're going to understand those reports, right? Years ago, I had a client who swore she only wanted to see the P&L. I tried to insist that she needed to look at the balance sheet. She was very strong-willed and she was adamant. She said, nope, I don't want to look at the balance sheet. All I care about is how much money am I making. I said, okay. I wasn't going to argue with her too much on it. And I certainly wasn't going to send it to her, especially because then she would probably have questions that she didn't understand based on the fact that she didn't understand what she was looking at. And in the end, she got selected randomly for an audit. And it was the information on the balance sheet that ultimately saved the day. And I was able to use what was on the balance sheet to satisfy the auditor. About the ultimate question was, hey, this business has been running at a loss for 2 or 3 years. That's shown up on the tax returns. How is this company still in business? And ultimately, I was able to show that the liabilities on her balance sheet cumulatively amounted to about what the cumulative losses were over the same period of time. And so that answered the question, satisfied the auditor, and she never questioned me again on the importance of the balance sheet after that experience. But sometimes it takes something to sort of shake a person up a little bit to get them to sort of see the light, right? So the moral of the story is I don't send a report to somebody unless I know they're going to read it and understand it, right? At least superficially. I don't expect the business owner to have an accounting degree because they do whatever business they do. They're not accountants. But as a business owner, obviously I expect or plan to teach my clients to have some sort of familiarity with what they're looking at and understanding of how to read it so that we can have an intelligent dialogue about their financial information. And then I can fill in any gaps along the way. So So statement of cash flows is, perhaps optional. Notice in the course that the video on this is over an hour long. This is the most in-depth look I've ever done on a statement of cash flows for people. I've done some videos on YouTube about it that were maybe 25, 30 minutes. This is as thorough as I've ever been about the statement of cash flows. Some of the other obvious ones that I want to send them on a weekly basis: accounts receivable and accounts payable. So for accounts receivable, I like to send them the open invoices, because I find that this makes more sense to the business owner, because it breaks it down, as you can see, by customer, and then every invoice that's due for each customer. So we're going to simply add that in. Open invoices as the report title is perfectly fine. And then we'll save that. And for accounts payable, it's called unpaid bills. It's basically the same report on the flip side, where you can see it broken down by vendor. And this is just going to be, you could send the aging to. And for those of you who may not be familiar, I'll run the aging to show you. And some clients I do send the aging to. But the difference is the aging most likely will only give rise to questions that can be answered on these two reports that I just showed you, right? So if I look at the payable aging summary, this just gives me the totals, which may be one invoice, maybe more, but they just give me the totals broken down by age, which is good to see. It's good to see if there's stuff that's really old. Anything sticking out past 30 days, I'll always question, especially a utility bill like Pacific Gas and Electric. That one we don't want to pay too late, right? They'll shut our lights off. So it can be useful in that regard, but most of the time I just give them the, what do you call it? The first two reports I just showed you, the open invoices and the unpaid bills, right? So let's take a look and see. So we've got a group of reports here, and this is by no means complete. You can obviously add in, and like I said, I usually start off with kind of a set of standard reports that I like to include, but then I want to have a conversation with my client and find out what more information they can see. The beauty of this process, especially when I involve the client directly and show them what I'm doing and what I want them to look at and how I want them to look at it, is it will often give rise to inquiry on their part with me about, it'll sound something like, this is when I knew I've really succeeded with this part of the process with my client, is when they start asking me questions that start off with something like, hey, I wonder if you can get me a report that shows, and then they'll fill in the blanks with whatever criteria they're looking for. And 9 times out of 10, or 9.9 times out of 10, I can get them what they need. It may take a little work in terms of customizing it, but I can usually make it happen. And now, by the way, with QuickBooks Online Advanced and custom fields, we have even more powerful capabilities in terms of describing the data, because that's what the clients want at the end of the day. They want data, right? As a business owner myself, running my own accounting business, I want data, right? I want data that tells me what's working and what isn't, and when things are and aren't working. And I want actionable intelligence that I can act on. And that means I got to start with very reliable or bulletproof books, and then I got to start cutting up the data, which is what the reports help me do, so I can really analyze things and make decisions about where should I go, what products are selling well, what products aren't selling well, what services aren't selling well. That's what these reports are going to help me to do. But before I even get there, they're going to also help me verify that everything looks right and accurate. Before I even start doing the analytics, I need to be assured that the reports are accurate. And these reports here that I've started with will accomplish probably 80 to 85% of that, right? Because I can look at an unpaid bills report, and the owner can look at that and say to me, no, I know that bill was paid. Which means, by the way, and I say this a lot because it's why I do it the way I do it, it means that if I've reconciled every account to the penny every month and they tell me they know that bill is paid, first, my experience says the business owner's instinct is usually accurate. But what it also means is, because I know I haven't omitted a single transaction by plugging a number, I know that if that's true, that payment is in here somewhere and it's just misclassified somehow. So all I need to do is find it and reclassify it and code it and get it applied to the bill, right? What it can usually mean in that case is we entered the bill and then recorded the payment directly to an expense account. So we've doubled the expense, right? And now our accounts payable is overstated, which means our liabilities on our balance sheet are overstated, which means our equity doesn't look as good as it actually is because the liabilities are off. So again, the first step is that when I know I have bulletproof books and the business owner says, I know that bill's been paid, then I know the payment's in there somewhere. I just have to find it and recode it to make it apply to the bill so that we, fix up that error in the accounting. So a weekly review of these reports is how we make sure that things stay on track, that nothing will get out of whack for more than a week before we catch and correct it. And one of my clients who I do this with every week always remarks how smart it is that I do this, because if we waited till the end of the year, it could be a disaster with everything that we would have to find and fix potentially, right? So that's why I like weekly. And then, of course, I'll establish a different group for monthly. And that's going to be, again, probably just the high level stuff like the balance sheet, the profit and loss, and the statement of cash flows. If the client is a little more sophisticated accounting wise, then I might even include a trial balance report. And I love that report, but it's one of those kind of like the statement of cash flows. It's only useful to somebody who understands what it really is. So without further ado, let's get into the automation part. At the group level, notice to the right of any of these, there's edit options, right? And if I click the drop down, I can also take any of these and export them as either PDF or Excel, or of course I can delete it if I decide it's no longer useful, right? But the top level, the group level, has some different options. I can export, of course, the whole group. Notice it only gives me the choice to do that as a PDF. It won't let me do Excel sheets as an export here. But if I click the edit button here, I get into the group options, and here's where I can set the email schedule. And so the first thing I do is turn it on, and it opens up the full-fledged dialog. And so how often do I want to send this group? So whatever's in the group is getting sent, right? If you need to send things on a different schedule, then you need to create 2 groups or more, right? So because the only way to set the schedule is on a group level. You can't set the schedule individually by report. So even if you have one report that you want to go out on some weird schedule, like every Monday, then you have to create a separate group just for that one report just to get the schedule done on that. So under repeats, we're going to change to weekly, right? We're going to say every Friday, because I said that's the day the client wants to review it. Now, you may be wondering what time, depending on where you are in the country. I think here where I am in California, it's about 1 a.m. the reports go out. So that works for me. Even if my client's on the East Coast, they're getting it at about 4 a.m. It's not exact, but it's around then. I have heard, it's been a while, but at one point I had heard some bookkeepers complaining that they didn't want the reports going out at that hour because somehow they seem to feel that that would invite the client to expect them to reply to inquiries at that hour. And quite honestly and frankly, I think that's ridiculous. Just because the report goes out, first of all, there's no need to hide the fact that it's automated, right? You know, just no reason under the sun I can think of why you should hide that. I tell the clients, I'm going to set this up on a schedule. It's going to go out to you automatically every week. What, you're afraid the client's going to ask me for a reduction in my fee because I've automated something? No, the point is I'm making it convenient. I'm making sure they have the data they need by the time they wake up in the morning, right? So point being, it's important to know that, because if I'm establishing that reports go to them on a Friday and their plan is going to be to review them at 9 a.m. on Friday, I need to make sure that they're actually getting this on time. If I'm not sure, then do it the day before. And then the other thing to keep in mind as the bookkeeper especially, or if you're the business owner doing your own books, if you know the reports are being sent to you on Friday, then make sure you're in the books updating the bank feeds Thursday, right? Because you really want everything completely up to date before those weekly reports go out. Otherwise, they start to become sort of useless or irrelevant until you. So when I schedule these reports, schedules with my clients' reports, I make sure that if it's me or if it's one of the bookkeepers that works with me, I make sure that they know that their schedule needs to be built around having the books up to date as close as possible before the reports go out, because I want them to have the most current information possible when they're reviewing it. But just to cover myself, I tell my clients it'll be at least it'll be current to within a week of the time they're looking at it. So I don't promise them it will be up to date as of the day before, and yet oftentimes that's what we'll deliver. But just in case, you know, we have to do their update on a Monday and don't get to it again until after that Friday, you know, always cover yourself with these kind of things to make sure that you set the right expectation, and you set the expectations in such a way that if anything, you can over deliver, right? That's the idea. So here's obviously where I put in the email address. Notice it says separate emails with a comma. So yes, I can send it to multiple people. If there's 3 people on the management team and I want them all getting these reports, then that's what I'll do. I will usually CC myself. I don't care about flooding my inbox with stuff. I like getting that notification. It reminds me, oh, this client just got their reports. Again, be on the lookout. They may have questions, right? Or I could look at the reports even, and if I see something, I might want to suggest jumping on a Zoom and saying, hey, I know you just got the reports. There's something I want to go over with you, you know, that kind of thing. I like being notified about this. 9.9 times out of 10, I get the email, I look at it, I know what's going on with the client, and I just archive the email. I don't need to do anything with it, but I like getting the reminder. And of course, you can customize the subject and the body of the email that's going out. And earlier I mentioned that I like to send these as Excel files. They will go as a PDF by default, unless you check this box way down here that says attach the report as an Excel file. I have one client who insists he wants to get PDFs. He doesn't like getting them in Excel. Funny thing is, he's a former CPA who's now in a totally different business. He's actually a realtor now. And for some reason, he just prefers the PDF. But I'm like, don't you want to be able to make comments? And he says, nope, I just want the PDF. For some reason, the Excel thing really bothered him. So I said, okay, your wish is my command. But this is how you'll set this up. So I'll just put in an email because it's required, just so I can sort of complete this process here. By the way, you can set an end date. So if there's a series of reports that you need to look at for a set period of time, then you can set up a group for that and then create the schedule accordingly. And then you can set when this group schedule ends, right? Other than that, I'll hit save and close. And now I can see the weekly management reports group goes out every single week. If I want to see when, I just tap the edit button. And that's really all there is to it. Again, it's a matter really, the hardest part is just figuring out and formatting the reports that you want going out on the schedule. And then, like I said, I've got the group that goes out weekly, and then I've got a group that usually goes out monthly, so that we kind of, we have a very thorough review process. The books are getting looked at weekly, and then they're getting looked at monthly, presumably after things are reconciled, so that we can really kind of confirm. And as the accountant, that's often the point in the process when I'm suggesting to the client, something along the lines of, hey, this is great. We're looking at some history reports. Now let's think in terms of looking at let's make history reports, which means I want to start doing projections. I want to start doing the real CFO level work and looking out into the future and looking at that with the client, because that's how we actually sort of turn on the headlights, so to speak, for the business and shine light on where we're going. Otherwise, it is kind of like driving in the dark without lights on. So let's see, I'm just looking at the comments in the chat here. Yes, I will post the recording, not on Facebook, but in the website, which I'll show you where last week's recording is on the website in case you don't know where to find it. Renaming the report, we like that. And yes, the group can only be saved for me. They have to create their own groups, but they'll see the reports. Okay, so I'll show you where to go to find the recordings of this. If we're on the new website, which is just new.nerdenterprises.com, you have to log in first. If you're not logged in, you'll see an option up here that says log in. And if you go into my courses, you'll find it in, I have all the courses, of course. You'll find it in Nerd Buzz. And there's a section in here called Bulletproof Bookkeeping Webinars and More. And that's where you'll find these recordings. Right, so this was actually not a webinar, but just a record. That's why it says webinars and more, because I'll have some other stuff in here too. This was something I did showing you why I love Bilby as the tool for doing that one part that is tracking the copies of the documents that prove and support the expenses and things. So this is last week's webinar. You can catch here. Yes, it could be good PR for me to throw these up on Facebook, but for reasons I don't want to bother getting into right at the moment, I don't necessarily want these so out there. I at least want people to frankly come in and get a free account on my website in order to get access to this, right? And I do have a method to my madness, like I said earlier. So bottom line is, if you really want this stuff, just get the course. I mentioned this last week. I'll mention it again. My deal on the course right now is if you sign up today and use code BB25, Bulletproof Bookkeeping, BB25, you'll get 25% off the price of the course. And I've also launched the property management course online, which, by the way, if you haven't signed up for either, you basically get that same discount by getting the bundle, right? Here it is. So you'll get Bulletproof Bookkeeping and property management for a total of $12.50, which is effectively the same 25% off the Bulletproof course, and then full price on the property management. So it comes out basically the same. So if you want both courses, just do this. If you just want the Bulletproof, check out with this one and then use the code BB25 and you'll get 25% off the price. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I'll stick around if anybody has any questions on automating reports or anything else.
Nice overview there, Seth.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, Seth. It's Melissa.
Mm-hmm.
When you're automating them to go out, say weekly, can you say every Friday rather
Yes,
than
you can.
the number of the day, like the 7th or, you know?
No, so that's exactly how we did it. So if you look back here, I said it's set to go out
Oh, yeah,
every Friday.
I see. Thanks.
Yeah. So it's you set how many, and I could do it every 2 weeks. Let's say I don't want to do weekly. Let's say I want to do bi-weekly. Then I can just change the frequency to 2 weeks, right? Some people might prefer that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure. Anything else? Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? All right, so next week I'll come up with another wonderful topic, I hope. If you have any suggestions for something you'd like to see me cover, then by all means let me know. You all know how to find me. All right, so send me an email, a Facebook message, a smoke signal. Smoke signals are hard. You have to be kind of close to Burbank for those, but I'll look for them. I look up at the sky quite a bit. I don't know how to read smoke signals, though. I'll have to read up on that from my high school history textbooks. I hope they explain that. I remember them talking about them. Anyway, you get the point. So this is what happens when I have too much coffee and too much energy. I can stay for another hour just going off on tangents like that. Somebody commented to me to that effect this week. They wrote a comment saying that I went off on too many tangents on something. I forget what video it was, but anyway, I said, oh well.
You're fun, Seth.
Thank you. I think I'm fun. I think I'm a great bunch of guys.
Now that's scary.
Exactly. All right, I'll see you all around.